Hello and welcome to the Notion Startup Template. This is a template I've been working on for the last few years of using Notion, stemming from starting my own company and seeking uh, resources on how to organize your company docs, and I couldn't find any, so that's where this all started. I have made this into a template you can duplicate if you'd like. Um, I'll include a link in the description if you're coming straight from the video, or you might be seeing this on the blog, in which case you can just scroll to the top and I have the steps on how to duplicate it there. Yeah, fundamentally, I'll go through the 3 rules I've found to keep in mind with your company or project docs, which are 1, Databaseify, 2, Templateify, and 3, Wikify. And I'm actually going to start with Wikify, because you can see right here how we have a different wiki for each facet of the company. And I've found this to be important because anytime a thought comes into my head, especially as a founder, you have to kind of be in charge of every aspect of the company. I can immediately say, okay, what aspect of the company does that apply to? So if it's a design-related thing, I can immediately go to the design wiki and then find the appropriate folder or doc from there on where to jot this kind of thought down. So yeah, that's I think why wikis are particularly important. When you duplicate this, ideally in your company workspace, these wikis will all be at the root level over here. So you can see this is just my personal account with like my own wiki, but ideally these docs, these folders right here, would actually all be at the root level. So then they would always be visible, and that really just helps with navigation, having a sense of where you are within your tree of docs. If your company gets big enough and your employees just, let's say, focused on their engineering wiki, they can always have this one opened if they'd like, to be able to easily jump to their most important tools. You can obviously favorite in Notion as well to just keep the important stuff at the top. But wanted to note that the only reason this is a folder is so that you can actually duplicate it, because otherwise you'd have to duplicate each of these separately if I had made them all root level docs. So diving into the other rules, Databaseify and Templateify. I'm going to go to the kind of home page first to show the databases. So you can see here we have our 6 databases at the bottom. These are the 6 I've found to be needed in each facet of the company. There probably are more, and if you come up with more, please let me know. I can add them here. But the 6 to start with are 1, an employee directory. So one spot to just be able to see everyone on your team. Obviously, Notion is just so powerful that you can see all the details you need. Filter what's shown here by default, etc. And by having this one source of truth, this database, we can then link to that database from each of these wikis, and I'll show you that in a sec. But that ensures you don't have like duplicate employee directories for every product team, design team, etc. It's all stemming from this one source of truth that we link to. So I'll show the Templateify a little bit. So now if we actually go to one of these employees, you can see we actually have this template that is pretty well designed, gives new employees a immediate first step to fill out, fun facts about them, etc. But by having that template that keeps all these docs consistent, and when a new employee is added, we can just use that template to automatically populate that bio, a photo for them to upload, the fun fact for them to fill out, etc. Now diving into the rest of the databases, glossaries, one I've found is nice to have. Everyone's got some kind of terminology that you're not going to know joining a new project or company. Tools is an important one. I think companies, especially these days, are using more and more tools. So yeah, having kind of one spot to see them all is really useful. The price column you could hide by default if you want and just let kind of management see them, but especially a startup in the early days, I've found it's really helpful to see the total that you're spending each month on tools. Then I do also have a template for these tools where When you create a new one, by default, it'll populate a bookmark for you to fill in, how to use that tool, and some best practices. So again, Templateify is important because it's actually instilling, good best practices with each doc that's made, which is actually, in this case, listing out best practices with this tool. Going to the next database here. Meeting Notes is actually a default Notion database. I tweaked this a little bit though, so you can see if we look at the templates, these are the different types of meetings you could create, and there's many more you could add here. But again, this creates consistency with all the meeting notes throughout the company. So anytime you're looking at like a weekly sync meeting, whether it's the sales team or engineering or what have you, it'll be kind of consistent in how it's formatted. You'll be able to more easily skim through if you did want to look at weekly syncs from different teams. If you look back at old weekly syncs on your team, you have consistent formatting that you can see high level what happened in that meeting. Best practices is the next database that honestly is pretty simple. Just the name of that doc and the team it's relevant to. There's more details you could add, but this still gives us the chance to create templates for these. And yeah, you can see in this case it's a little engineering specific with accessibility related stuff, but these are just examples. Then how-tos is our next database. And this one, again, we have kind of simple with the name and who it's relevant to. You'll notice actually the relevant to can get very specific, not just the high-level team, but even, let's say if it's engineering, as the company grows, you could add the core product team or maybe the growth team. As the team continues to grow, you may have pods, and then it might be the virality pod on that growth team, for example. So I'll actually show you in a sec where this comes into play, but this helps us with filtering these how-tos in those specific teams and pods. So that's the home. Now you can see with each facet of the company, we have a wiki, and each of those wikis has those databases right at the top, but those databases are linked and filtered. So in this case, we have our product glossary, which by default has this filter. So, if folks are on the product team, they can easily always just hop to the product glossary, which has that filtered view of terms that are only relevant to them. They don't need to go back to the root level database and then filter. It's already filtered for them. And yeah, the same applies to each of these. So, the meeting notes are all going to be filtered, how-tos, best practices, etc. Here we can see, best practices. These are relevant to product design and engineering, so that's why they show up here. I'll just jump through these real quick. There's other docs, obviously, you can continue to add. These are really the kind of fundamental ones that you'll likely want. Design, there we have engineering. We can actually jump in and see, let's see the directory that's filtered, for example. So yeah, these are just the engineers on the team. And as the company grows, maybe you'd want to have a table view instead of gallery, because this would become a lot of kind of thumbnails. I'll just go through the rest of the wikis first before getting to the next point. Yeah, the databases again filtered here. Other sales related docs. Customer success, all of those databases filtered, docs specific to them. Growth and marketing. And if you're just watching the video and not reading the blog, you can pause this to just read what each of these docs are if you'd like. You'll also notice a theme. A number of these have like a roadmap. So there's a product roadmap, there's a marketing one. Even human resources can have a hiring roadmap, but still the filtered databases that are linked here. Linked to a database is a powerful feature that Notion offers. Operations then can kind of be almost like your management team in the early days, stuff that this one you could only share with specific folks on the team if you want, if it has more sensitive info. And finally, the public wiki. So this one can actually just be a public page that anyone could find. That if someone wants to work at your company, you could just link to this and let them go to maybe your careers page or see your help center or maybe videos, API docs, etc. So then the final thing I wanted to jump into was actually teams and guilds. So especially as your team grows or your company or project grows, you're going to need to organize this even more. So as an engineer primarily, I come at this from more of a product engineering standpoint, but product teams, for example, can really start to fill up with all the different types of products you have. Maybe you have a core product growth, infrastructure, maybe devices, like you have an iOS app, Android, Roku app maybe. And so with each of these, I've included a template as well. So, you have an onboarding doc specific to that team, pods within that team, and each pod has its own template. And here again, you can see, that filtered employee directory view where it's just folks on that specific team. And then the pods as well. As your company grows, you'd have individual pods that are doing their own thing and need to have their own meeting notes, glossary, how-tos, etc. And these can again be a linked database that's filtered. So you can see it's a linked database, and in this case we could actually just filter by that specific pod that is tagged in the relevant to column. So yeah, I wanted to show this as well, because product teams would be vertical layers within the company, but the other thing to consider is actually the horizontal levels within the company, which Spotify kind of made popular the term guild. So you can see here, you can also have guilds where, folks can be working on iOS, let's say, but they're on different teams. But it's still important that you have common docs that they can all look at, like iOS best practices, for example. So within each guild, you can have, again, a lot of those similar linked databases, or in this case, even new ones like architecture, different programs going on. You can have a program template there, like you saw, how-tos, a glossary specific to that guild. And if we actually look at an example like iOS, let's say, we could have, our onboarding that's specific to iOS folks, because they're going to have to clone a certain GitHub repository that may be different from the rest of the folks. We'd have our iOS glossary that's specific to them, iOS programs, so this may be like internationalization that we have going on, and within each program we have this template as well, a timeline, tech specs, meeting notes that again are specific and filtered, decision log. So then, last thing to note that I was going to show is if we actually go back to the Engineering Wiki here, with a good structure I found for onboarding, you actually can include a root level, hey, new hires start here, right, in Engineering Wiki, for example, which then gives every engineer steps they'll need to take, and, every engineer is going to have to do certain things, whether that's, let's say, 1Password access, GitHub access, etc. There's certain channels, every engineer is going to want to be in. But then once you actually get into the final steps of which repository do you set up, that's actually going to be more of a guild level thing, right? So step 3 is actually going into, let's say, again, iOS. The doc we were just looking at, that would tell you what repository to install. And finally, then you could even go to your team's specific onboarding. So if you're on the growth team, for example, you'd have slightly different steps from the core product team because you need different tools. Maybe you need, more like A/B testing tools and, different Slack channels you join. So that's the final point that isn't really part of the 3 rules, but just a general organizational tip that hopefully is helpful. And that's the Notion startup template. And um, yeah, if you'd like to to duplicate this, I'll include a link in the description of the video, or you might be seeing this from the blog itself, in which case there's a link on how to get this at the top of the page. And hope it's helpful. Cheers.